bringing us to 9:20 in the morning, and you are tuned to Grecian Echoes here on WNTN 1550 AM in Cambridge, Needham, and Boston. We're streaming at WNTN.com on this Monday, February 17th, 2025. It's Mondays with Meleti, and your host, Meleti Pouliopoulos, are here today with a very special guest, Kottaridis. She's Director of Historic Preservation for the City of Boston, and she brings over 30 years of expertise in preservation, urban planning, and public administration to the city's Office of Historic Preservation. Her department oversees the Boston Landmarks Commission, the city's 10 Historic District Commissions, Boston's Archaeology Program, and planning for the forthcoming commemorations, including the 250th anniversary of American independence and Boston's 400th anniversary in 2030. Kathy's work safeguards Boston's rich history while promoting inclusive, community-centered preservation that reflects the city's evolving identity. Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning to you, and happy President's Day.
Oh, it's President's Day.
It is.
Oh, happy President's Day.
Thank you.
Now, when we were in school, there were two, right?
Right.
Two holidays. Yeah.
I miss those days.
I miss those days, too. You know, we always had
Two
this.
holidays in a month.
Yeah. Well, how was the ride in this morning? A little icy?
Yeah, a little bit. You had to watch out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a night, huh?
Yeah, it was a crazy night. Very, very dangerous. So you're in this wonderful position of historic preservation, and it's relatively new, right?
It's about almost 3 months old for me. So I still feel like a newbie, and still looking for the pencil sharpener and the copy machine.
Do you go into the office every day?
I go 4 out of 5 days of the week. We're allowed to. City employees can stay home 2 days of the week. I actually find I'm more productive when I go in than I am if I'm distracted at home. But it's also helpful to have some quiet time at least once a week to focus on stuff.
Is that government center that you go to?
Yeah, we're actually at the moment not in City Hall itself. We're in what used to be the Kirstein Business Library. Some folks might remember that tucked away behind the old City Hall. Yeah. And that's a temporary thing for us. While the space that we will ultimately occupy is being renovated.
Yeah.
So
tell us about your position, historic preservation. Is this a fairly new office, or has it been around for a while?
No, it's been around for many years, actually. The legislation that ultimately determined that we should have a preservation office and function in City Hall goes back to 1975. So we really have been at this business of creating historic districts and Boston landmarks for years.
Really? That's so great.
Yeah. And Boston's very rich in all of this, but layered as well. So let's be clear, it's not just the old guys with the white wigs and tri-corner hats. It's also the stuff that I think we'll end up talking about a little bit today. Our own community's history layered into the city of Boston.
Right. It's probably a newer way of looking at things.
Yep.
There was a certain point in time where so much was focused on, in Greek heritage, so much was focused on ancient Greece. Yeah. And now things are opening up too. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about your previous position, because you were with the nonprofit Historic Boston Incorporated for many, many years. And tell us about some of the things you did in that role.
Yeah, that was fun. It was 17 years of redeveloping historic buildings that were endangered. So they were either in really poor condition or they were threatened with demolition or something like that, all within the municipality of Boston. And so Historic Boston, which has been around for about 3 years, has been largely focused on acquiring those, rehabbing them, and selling them with some protections on them to willing buyers so that they can continue to be used. We never did a museum. We always did buildings that could be new housing, new offices, new types of spaces that would help people today, but preserve the rich building heritage of Boston.
Yeah. So in with that, you were probably working with the city of Boston,
Yes.
many different departments,
Yes.
right? So
Yes, very much.
that was a natural fit.
Yeah.
That's so great. Now, were you thinking you were going to take this job? Were thinking about it for a long time, or is it something that just popped up?
Complete surprise. I
Really?
thought for sure that I'd keep rehabbing buildings and retire from historic Boston. But no, I was approached by the Wu administration sometime last summer. And, I thought about it and I debated it, and it was a debate. But I really, I saw the opportunity to do something extra special, to go to the policy level, to be thinking about initiatives and laws and ordinances and things like that that could really help historic buildings and communities in the city now who are trying to tell their stories.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So tell us about that. How does that work? A lot of times we hear about the old Greek section down on Stewart Street
Yep.
and the Arabic section that was
Yep,
right there.
right there too.
And so, how would your department be involved in preserving those memories?
Well, there's multiple ways that it can happen, but in some cases, if there are buildings that are super important, that reach a certain level of significance, can be landmarked, which offers a high degree of protection by the city of Boston in perpetuity. In other words, it cannot be demolished, it cannot be modified inappropriately. The other more light touch would be that we would amend, and this I think is happening with many different communities over time and places, that we amend inventory forms that we keep on every building in Boston that's over the age of 50. And we pretty much have an opportunity to layer in newer stories in the last 50 to 100 years, not just the one of who built it and who first lived in it, but who's been there over time. Because that community is now largely Chinatown.
Yes, that's
right?
right.
And even Chinatown has been changing,
Yeah.
and ethnically
Yes.
over time. So lots of stories to tell and keep telling.
And where will those stories be held? At the Boston Public Library primarily, or how do you?
Well, the good news is that every time one of these inventory forms that I referred to gets updated, it's uploaded to and every community in Massachusetts does this, uploads them to the Massachusetts Historical Commission's website, MACRIS, MACRIS, and you can search it and look for your address in it. It's a great way to know whether something has been has a special protection on it, has some good background information that you can use as reference point, or it doesn't have enough and we need to know more. In other words, we're always taking information from people on places whose most recent history has not been told.
Yeah, Macris is MACRIS.
Yep.
Sounds like a Greek name.
Doesn't it?
I had a Greek teacher, and he told me everything was Greek.
Of course.
Everything was.
We just don't brag.
Does it happen sometime? Is it possible that there was a building that wasn't earmarked as a landmark or as a historic site, and all of a sudden, up in Portsmouth, I know we found a cemetery that was a slave cemetery
Absolutely.
from way back. Yeah.
Oh, lots and lots of things like that. It's hard to say, but over generations, people forget. Over time, people forget too. And so things like what happened in Portsmouth do happen all over the place, and we discover stories, but we also discover places that look pretty anonymous and not very interesting, but have some really interesting histories attached to it. It could be as informal as that it was the soda fountain for the Syrian community in Boston, and who knew, right?
Right.
But it could also, and like the place to meet, the place to go, the place to gather, but it could also be something much more significant, like it was a place where a major uprising was planned, not just here, but maybe elsewhere. You never know what you're going to find. A new faith was developed, a new effort to around civil rights was really initiated. I mean, sometimes we forget that those things happened in places too.
Right. Yeah. So do you ever, here in Boston, do you ever have the debate where someone comes along and says, look, we want to tear it down. It's just, it's in Iripio. It's just, what are you going to do with it? Come on. Let us have another bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let's be clear that preservation helps us with managing change. There's not every building will survive, and we have no illusions about that. I think what we try to do is highlight the history and the significance of a place and determine either when it's threatened or even before that it needs to be protected. Almost every one of our great buildings in Boston, like the Old South Meeting House and the Old State House, places like that have been threatened in the past with demolition and removal
Really?
because the
Yeah.
city has grown and changed and population increases. Right now, we have a housing crisis in Boston and the whole region, actually. So we need to find ways to create more density. But we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So good planning leads to good outcomes. And we won't, as I said, be able to save everything. And sometimes and I'm not saying that this is just a consolation prize, but sometimes when we do lose things, sometimes we need to put a marker on it, because that's another way that we can let people who walk by know that Chinatown was once the Greek and Syrian and a diversity of those ethnic groups who saw that as a center.
Yes.
I think we have lots and lots of past to elevate through different methods. But our city and our communities are going to keep going, right? They got to.
Right.
And we want the past with the present and the future.
In your bio here, it's not a bio actually. It was just a press release, I think, from the city of Boston. Mayor Michelle Wu. It says on the top, Kathy Kottaridis, Director of Historic Preservation. It says Kathy's work safeguards Boston's rich history while promoting inclusive, community-centered preservation that reflects the city's evolving identity. This is exactly what we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
And so do you have community programs specifically? Do you partner with community organizations to bring forward the history? Or?
We do. It happens more informally and on an ad hoc basis. I won't say that there's a formal program, but communities are always in planning, and change is always happening, and we are always talking to neighborhoods about what they're, and these happen with individual groups or individuals, but we're always talking to them about what's important and what they think needs to be preserved or protected in some way, shape, or form. We work with communities when they are nominating. We don't just create landmarks, by the way. When I mentioned earlier, there's a process, and it usually starts with communities nominating places for protection or for that elevation to being a landmark, so that they're protected and that the full story is known, not just of the community, but of that particular place.
Yeah, it's so important. I was just thinking, I always get asked the question up in Manchester, why was the old church torn down? With all of the,
Yep.
the iconostasis, all the beautiful icons that were painted on the wall, why was that all torn down? And we don't have an answer for that. After it happens, once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a funny moment in time where we suddenly realize that something we have is precious. But it doesn't always happen early on. We think that, and I think our communities coming here to the U.S., building that first church or buying that first church, and then moving into a phase in which we feel like we've got resources now, we can build something better. We can build
Yes.
I think in those moments we didn't know that what we had was something that we were going to treasure later. And I think there's a moment in time, hard to predict, where we suddenly are aware of it. And I think it's happening in our community, our Greek community now, right? That
Yeah.
what with our parents' and grandparents' generations largely gone. I mean, it's a time that we can look back and say, geez, what's precious that we want to remember, not just them, but that generation and that period of time and that exertion that they undertook,
Yeah.
that allowed us to be where we are today.
It's an important point because part of that might be getting oral histories, and the people, while they're around, we want to hear from them, right? So, but we went from talking about buildings, perhaps, to talking about heritage, which may have
Yes.
artifacts. It may be, this brick or this something.
Yep.
This music or these films or these newspapers.
They're all related. They're all intertwined.
Yeah.
You cannot research a building without consulting documents or talking to people and eliciting their stories, right?
Right.
So it's very hard to protect a building and write about it and tell its full story without going to the archive, right?
Yeah.
And consulting and reading papers, old newspapers, old documents of, say, a church, or watching old films, or listening to old audio. It's all intertwined, and the absence of those resources in the archive, whether it's what you and I have at home or whether it's something that's sitting in an institution, the absence of that makes it really hard to preserve and protect. It makes it really hard to tell the full story.
It does. I mean, if you lose the artifacts, Tina Bukovalis, our friend Tina, had a really interesting thing. She said, theories come and go, but the artifacts remain.
I can't underscore that enough. The documents will be reinterpreted over and over and over again for some end or another, from some research.
Yeah.
There's never any one history. History changes over time.
It does. And sometimes it's overwritten, and that's where it gets a little disturbing. So I have, I'm reading about the 29th annual Greek Independence Day parade, but I just got done doing a presentation to the Alpha Omega Council to tell them that our history with Greek Independence Day parades goes much further back. And
imagine,
1903, we had articles in the Globe talking about, and it wasn't just one or two guys waving a flag. It was a big start at the church and come down, and the whole thing. And for us to bury that or somehow think that what we're doing now is more significant, it actually overwrites the history, and
Absolutely.
It's so damaging. And
Absolutely. And back then, that march meant a lot. That was a show of strength on behalf of the entire community. Now it's much more about nostalgia, and yes, that we exist and we have presence, and we want to keep doing that, but it's changed. Back then, we were showing some muscle, and we were saying, pay attention to us. And that was meaningful then, and we cannot overlook that.
We can't. It's part of the struggle. It's funny. I'm laughing because I'm thinking that in the article it says that particular year in 1903, the Greeks had decided to dress up in full costumes. And so it wasn't just, one or two people here or there. It was like hundreds of people in Fustanelas going down. And how proud
Didn't
they
you
must
have one?
be.
I had one growing up.
Did you?
Yes.
I wore one for a short time, but yeah, it's part of our heritage. And then we have this, well, what do we do with these artifacts? And I'm always in a position, I think you may have come through this before, where you want to assign a value to something, to let something know how important it is. But let's say that you come to me with a book, and I say, well, I know that book is probably worth $50,000.
Right.
Then you'll say thanks very much and go to eBay. Maybe, have a nice vacation in the Caribbean and get a boat or something. I don't know, but that's the risk that we have because you want to let people know it's important, but also that don't be greedy.
Right. So, well, and let's be honest, that would be a very unusual situation. And is it really worth trading out generations of ability to see our history for $1,000? Maybe, but I don't think. I mean, it depends on the individual, of course. But I would say, on the whole, and I admire the work that you've been doing in trying to promote the idea that we need a Greek American archive somewhere, and even if it starts with our region, but we need it somewhere, largely because we're a dwindling population, I won't say dwindling. We're changing, and we're spreading out, and we're thinning out, maybe demographically. And I think it's important for us to show that our space and our place in time. So having an archive and having a place to put Yaya's photographs and Yaya's papers, her immigration papers, is, I know that sounds like, why would anybody care about my Yaya? Well, because you know what? It was an example of an experience that many, many, many people endured. And not everybody's immigration papers are left.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
That's so true.
And we have photos that I can't stand it when I find photographs that are unidentified.
Oh, it's the thing that people don't ask. They don't sit down with their children and tell the stories and write the things in the back. And when the children think to ask, well, now Mama's got dementia, you know.
Oh my gosh. My gosh. Well, and I would say that the best, and this happened rather late in time, but my mother sat down with stacks of old photographs from her side of the family and put little stickers on the back and identified everybody.
Oh, God love her. Your mother was a lovely person. She really was. Let's talk about your upbringing, because your mom was from Lewiston, as I understand.
Lewiston, Maine, yep.
And your dad?
My dad was from Agrilos in Adfara, outside of Kalamata in Greece.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're at the same olives,
But he was
right?
of the same olives.
I love it. I love it.
So yes, and he came in the late 50s to the U.S.
He did, right?
Yeah.
And he told me a very nice story. I know this little sidebar, but he had said when he first came, he remembered going to the coffee house and that my papu was there. And in the coffee house, that was the place where you get the scoop and what was going on. But he also served as a chanter for the church up in Dover.
That's right.
And that's where you and I met many years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
What got you interested in historic preservation? When did that start?
I don't know that. Well, I think I always loved buildings and architecture, even as I won't say youngster, but somewhere in my youth. But I also really loved history. And I think history is woven. I can't think of a Greek who doesn't like history. I mean, it runs deep, right?
It does.
And in my family, it certainly ran deep. My uncle was a historian. And yet I would also say that listening to stories, you're often listening to people's history, right?
Yeah.
And I just found all of that very interesting. And the two together, history and architecture, to me equals historic preservation, even though preservation can be many, many things. But over time in studying history in college and historic preservation as a graduate student, I've seen many archives, I've seen many documents, and I've seen those largely representative of long-time embedded communities, the good old white Anglo-Saxon Protestant group.
Yeah.
But I think now we're moving into a period in which we're really finding precious the things that come from immigrant communities that were so abundant in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and have really shaped America in the 20th and 21st centuries. And it keeps happening, right?
It does.
There's so many new communities from other parts of the world who are going through what our families went through. And I think they're going to leave things behind that need to be collected and stored somewhere for others to consult later on to write future history. So to me, I was very interested in that whole idea, and I loved looking at old photographs, and I loved the stories, and not just mine, but other people's. I just think that there's a lot to be said there. And I also think that history is, if I ask you your history, or about where you grew up and all the things you're asking me right now, I'm forming a picture of you. And I think that happens in our daily lives with individuals, but also communities as well, how we see place, how we see our neighborhoods. So we should be preserving and protecting, places, but documents, they're easy to lose, and they're easy to find that we don't know where they are anymore, or to the things that we have in our attics to be hurt by flood and all of those things.
So many things. I brought in a couple of smelly things I have in isolation bags, but I want to show you, and something that I just picked up in an auction, which is a lefgoma. It's a notebook, a scrapbook of the theological seminary at Pomfret.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and the photos in it you'd make you cry. And I'm looking at this, it's all in Greek,
Wow.
and I have to go out into auction space now to purchase our heritage.
Yep.
What happens with, because everyone's probably saying, hey, look, we've got 1 million libraries.
Yep.
We've got, why wouldn't, but what happens when an institution takes in, and it's not part of their collection scope. They take it in, it ends up in their basement, and maybe it needs to go to the Chinese museum or to, right?
Right.
So is that a problem? I've come across it all the time.
Yeah. I guess I would say to anybody listening, don't give anything to an institution that cannot tell you exactly how they're going to treat it, how they're going to document it, how they're going to make it available to the public. Because if they plan on just storing it until then that's not the right place. And to your point, Meleti, there's plenty of places to bring things that you have, photographs, documents, photo albums, whatever. And it could be, if all of those things, Pomfret, for example, where could that go?
Right.
That could go to Holy Cross.
It could.
It could go to the Greek Museum in Chicago. It could go to the Pomfret Historical Society. It could go to several different places and fit in, right? And so that's to argue that that's okay, so long as they're willing to take care of your donation, and that they're not going to put it in a box in the basement, because to me that's just almost like having it in your own basement. I mean,
the part of my job in Greek Cultural Resources is to, when material is donated that's not part of my collection scope, I have to find a home for it.
Right.
I don't have the space, and B, you want it to survive, you want it to be studied, you want it to be accessed and everything. And there are many, many examples of how that's happened. And so from all over the country, I receive material, and I also send material all over the country to institutions. But there are those that have, and they're not taking things out of a session. They have material that they've brought in, and if it's not accessible, what good is it?
Yeah.
It's
hopefully someone at some point in time will go back, look in those boxes and say, either we get this somewhere else, or we document it, we inventory it and make that inventory available to the public. My own experience in the not too distant past was after 50 odd years sitting in my uncle's basement, I discovered that my grandfather's papers. Now, my grandfather was a Greek immigrant in the 1890s to many parts of the U.S. He sort of came in through Canada, went west, and then came back east and landed in Lewiston, Maine. He apparently, throughout his life, had kept many, many important documents, and thankfully my historian uncle, John Petropoulos, kept those in his basement after my grandfather died in 1972. I think he had hoped to go through them and understand more about what was in them and that sort of thing, but never quite got around to it. Yeah. And my uncle passed away in 1999, and my aunt, this was maybe 10 years ago, my aunt called me and said, I think you're the only person in the family who's going to appreciate all of this. Can you come get these?
No kidding.
And they were pretty amazing to go through. I realized that thanks to my uncle, my grandfather's entire life and documents in 6 boxes was preserved. Things that were unique to stories that I knew that, no one else is going to necessarily care about. But also just the general progression of a Greek immigrant who's coming into a new country and making his way. And so my grandfather became a cop. He get big in the Republican Party up there in Maine and
no
all
kidding.
of, oh yeah.
No, a Greek cop though in those years.
Yeah, he was the first in Maine, that's for sure. Greek cop on the force anywhere in Maine. And that started in 1918. So he was kind of an interesting guy, and he was a really interesting guy. But the point is that he was made even more interesting to me because I had all these documents that I could go back in and see how he became a Mason, how he came through Western Massachusetts and then finally to Lewiston, Maine. there were so many different things that I could learn about him that I would never have known had these not been preserved in some way, shape, or form. Great. So that's just the way that you might use archives. That said, I thought to myself, I don't know what to do with these. Is there a Greek archive? Well, I hadn't thought about talking to you about it.
I would have died. I would have died for it.
And then I thought, well, yeah, there's the museum in Chicago. There's probably some other, academic institutions like Princeton and places like that that have Greek and or Greek American programs. But at the end of the day, I felt really strongly that it had to be a really good institution that would not put these boxes in a basement, and that also related more to the majority of my grandfather's life, and that would make all of these available through databases, so that if you're researching Greek Americans in Maine, you'll find my grandfather right away.
Yeah.
I felt so if those were like the three things that were most important, I landed on the Maine Historical Society.
Wonderful.
Because another little part of me felt strongly that a pretty old white bread institution needed to have a little bit of color, right? And that having his stuff as part of the main story was also a way of certainly it was available to anybody doing research on Greek Americans or on Maine. But it was also really important to have it integrated into the American story.
Did you yourself list out your collection before you had donated it?
I
there?
did.
You did. I thought you would.
I did.
Well, that's good for us, right?
Yeah.
Because right away there's a finder's aid.
Absolutely. But the Maine Historical Society asked for a very nominal contribution in order to step up getting everything inventoried themselves. So there are two things that had gone on. I inventoried everything, but also Maine Historical did that and did a finder's aid and did a summary of my grandfather's life, so that if you go into their collection, they have all of that available. But if you Google my grandfather or Greek Americans in Maine, he'll come up and hit the finder's aid. His name was Anthony Petropoulos.
I didn't know that John was your uncle, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm just, okay, Anthony Petropoulos, great.
Yeah, we all get the history gene.
I'm just curious, because you mentioned the Masons, too.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have, you mentioned the Masons. Was there a Hellenic Square and Compass Club? Was it a Greek order of the Masons up there?
No. My grandfather became a Mason, I think, out in Western Massachusetts before he moved to Lewiston in 1918 and became he was very involved in the Cora Temple, which is a beautiful building in downtown Lewiston.
Oh, I've never been there.
But it was very mainstream Mason.
Right, yeah. And any other organizations, Greek organizations, that you can remember? I know it's a lot of papers, but was he an Ahepin? Was he a Gapa?
Oh, gosh, yeah. No, he was a Ahepin.
Yeah.
Definitely went to all the conventions and all of that stuff.
No kidding.
But the other story that surfaced with my grandfather, which I knew about because in 1972, just actually the year he passed away, in the spring of the year he passed away, my grandfather was involved in Republican politics, and his idol, Spiro Agnew, Greek American,
Spiro was big back
came
then.
to Maine to address the Republican convention. And my grandfather brought to him a gift of a Bates bedspread manufactured in Lewiston, Maine, as a gift, and got a chance to meet the vice president in the green room and all that nice stuff. But the bedspread was taken away, and the card fell off, and there was all this misinterpretation of what had happened, and it became this political hot potato.
You're kidding.
Agnew thought the governor of Maine had given it to him, and how terrible that Democrat had sent a gift, and it just was such interesting crossfire. In the meantime, my little grandfather, at that point 89 years old, is raising his hand from Lewiston, Maine, saying, ooh, no, it was just me, and I just admire you. So it led to this nationwide newspaper coverage, and that was all about the mysterious bedspread that landed in Agnew's possession, and finally, after 2 or 3 days of stories, that landed in the LA Times and all over the country.
Oh,
My little grandfather was finally acknowledged as the donor, and Spiro Agnew sent him a letter, and we have that. But
oh,
actually,
nice.
actually, the Maine Historical Society now has that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's good. I'm going to make my way up. So, do they
But
have things online now? They have the
yeah, yeah,
capability.
the Finder's Aid, which has the whole list of everything. You'd have to call the institution to actually get either a copy of it or something like that. But let me just add, though, that within a year of our making that donation to them, which was what I loved about it was that it was so comprehensive in my grandfather's life. But within a year, Maine called to say, we're doing an exhibit on the 400 years of immigration to Maine
Yeah.
and ethnic communities over time coming to
Oh,
Maine. We want to highlight your grandfather. So literally, alongside the Chinese guy and the Italian guy,
yeah, I love
my
it.
grandfather's profiled with these
Yeah.
objects.
Oh,
My grandfather was a cop. We had his police officer jacket and badge and whistle and all of those things from way back then. So they were able to provide objects to go along with telling a story in an exhibit. So that just is one example of how it can be used in this time now. But I'm hoping that 200 years from now, somebody uses it for something else to tell some other story, either about Greek Americans or about the Maine experience. I mean, but a more rich and layered story about the
yeah.
Maine experience, not just,
Right.
some old coastal, story.
Yeah, because it sounds like your grandfather did very well, but the early immigrants, a lot of them were fighting in the streets
Yes.
to be accepted,
Yep.
and it was very important for them to be seen as people who were good Americans and we proved ourselves
Yep.
out, but it was a rough period of time. So,
Oh, I think that's okay. My grandfather in the end did do well, but I will say this: everybody struggled, and
yeah,
and I think that the things that he struggled with really really early on are things that I think exemplify the experience. It just so happens that somebody came along and saved all his stuff,
right.
and that's the pitch, right?
Yes.
Folks, if you've got things in your basement, if you've got things in your attic that you haven't identified yet, do that. But after that, call Meleti. He knows what to do with
Yeah,
it.
definitely. Please give me a call.
But that's why I admire what you're doing, and I think
Thank
I
you.
just want to put in a pitch for that. That I think that we all, as a community, need to recognize things change and our lives go on, and we leave things behind, and some of them are going to keep telling stories that are important to the future, and
Yeah.
and don't ever assume that they're not, and that it's really important to preserve and protect them. And what you're doing, Meleti, in trying to establish a an archive of Greek objects, items, whether it's music or whether it's letters or scrapbooks. These are going to be important things that we leave behind. And there are going to be a bunch of pieces of the mosaic that tell the whole story.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
I want people to know too that you did make a great point that there are a lot of institutions out there,
Hmm.
and with my institution, Greek Cultural Resources, I'm not saying that we should be the only one, kids on the block. Quite differently,
Yeah.
that it's going to. I think there's so much in all the communities and all the homes across the country that just that bit that you said, that people need to start thinking about things a little
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah. Time, gives us perspective. But I will just say, because I did not know, I think, when I did this with my grandfather, that you were collecting documents.
Right.
But I think that that's a very different perspective for me now. But we did give you, I think, his record albums.
They were beautiful records. They were so well preserved too. They were in, albums,
Yeah.
and they were the 12-inch, and I treasure those.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I had pigeonholed you with music, but
No, that's okay. I always tell the story because people
Yeah.
ask, why did your collection guidelines expand? I said, out of necessity.
you bet.
Yeah,
You bet.
I was out picking up a collection once, and someone said, "Do you do anything with Byzantine music?" And we have these books from 1859
Oh
from
my God.
Constantinople.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
and they were in Byzantine script.
Jeez.
So That was that was our ID. And yeah, so I took them to a friend, a scholar, who started to chant from the book, who took it to Father, who's now Father Romanos. He was teaching at the school, at the seminary, and he says, this is a very important book, and we don't have it in the library here.
Wow.
So, and then people were giving me newspapers, and I was finding things, all of these artifacts that haven't been in the libraries, or if, like you say, if they're there, we don't know it.
Right.
And so I feel like this is a real important thing.
Oh, no, couldn't agree more.
Our guest this morning is Kathy Kottaridis, Director of Historic Preservation for the City of Boston. Kathy, you've been down here a long time. I remember there was a time, Mary Cleary, by the way, I did post something on Facebook. I hope that was okay.
Oh, of course.
And Mary Cleary had said, "Oh, I've known Kathy for a long. We go way back." And ding! I remember that you were at the cathedral.
Yes.
Way back back, like in the 80s, maybe late 80s,
late
early
80s.
90s.
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty old now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, another great. Actually, I think I had an archival experience there too. Many of our churches that go way back have stuff too. That's how I got to meet the folks at the cathedral, because I had been asked in graduate school to write the National Register nomination for the Greek Orthodox Cathedral. And that was in 1988, and I did, and so I learned so much, but I was given access to the archives of the cathedral, and they were terrific. I mean, the minutes of board meetings, they were really terrific, and some really interesting people, and they were both struggling and yet hopeful and optimistic in putting together money to build a church. I mean, that was a major opus for that community.
Was that, now where were those physical archives?
They were at the Cathedral Center in Brookline.
Right.
So they sort of followed the administration of the cathedral.
That's good to hear.
But they were up in the attic.
Oh, yeah. So you got them just in time.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where they've landed, but I think that's important.
It's really important. Sometimes people we talk about church records, and we started a library up at St. George, totally funded by the community, by the way. It's in its 5th year. We have volunteers, and every week it's like an Antiques Roadshow. People are bringing in things. But we realize how important it is and what a great responsibility it is for us to keep this going.
Yep.
And because if not, then it's just something that we worked on for a while, and then it'll end up in a box in a basement.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening. A lot of our photographs, a lot of our memories are tied up that way. Well,
and for folks listening, just remember there are many institutions out there. Call Meleti; he'll get you where you need to go. But there's the New England Historical Genealogical Society. They have a new name now. There's many historical societies that are very worthy around Boston and around the region in your own town. Just don't just keep them locked up in the basement, because anything could happen.
Anything could happen, but I want to just put a little caution out there for people too. And I do appreciate getting the call, because some institutions work their front door very well. Oh, sure, send it to us. We'll send you a box, send you a label, and but then if it doesn't come with money, it's in the basement.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
We ran into that.
You ran into that, right?
Yes.
We have a huge collection that we've donated recently, a few years ago, of 232 bankers' boxes filled with material. The historic and cultural significance of this collection is huge. Yep. And now I'm finding out that parts of that collection is going to off-site storage, undescribed. So there's a lot of collections that are hanging in the balance, and that comes into where we need funding, and we need support. How do I get, the Greek community, you're part of it. And what is it about, how do we get people to understand the real value? Because people I've heard all the attitudes, actually. I've heard all the comments, I should say. Oh, someone else will do it. If Meleti doesn't do it, someone else will. Or what is it, why we always say, why don't you go to that family with all the money? Why don't you give them a call? Well, wait a minute. Do you know what I mean? What about our own individual responsibility?
Yep, that's right. That's where I am. And yet I do think that the folks who have resources should see that this is an important place to put support. So everybody needs to be involved is really what I think you're saying.
I'm saying
right?
it. I've been saying.
But
Yeah.
every institution, every nonprofit organization that I know gets the little contributions and gets the big contributions, and
Yeah.
they all add up to the common mission, right?
They do.
So everybody should be making contributions. That to me, in the nonprofit that I previously ran, I put as much value on the $25 contribution as I did the $25,000. I recognize that one buttered more bread, but
Yeah.
but I have to say I saw support in both of those that meant that somebody really cared, and I think we have to show that we care.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing.
Right.
It's not about us. That's the
Right.
other thing.
Right.
It's a difficult thing. But I had to talk about a $25 donation. A man who does not have a computer, he does not have he doesn't have the internet,
Yep.
and he has an answering machine. Sometimes it works. And that's it, So he writes letters, and he had found an article that was written in the National Herald on my work. He's in Nevada, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
And he mailed me a check with a very nice letter. He types letters, and I type letters back to him. It's the way we do it. Do you have some time? This
Yeah.
is so enjoyable. I'm wondering if we can. Do you want to open up the phone lines?
Yeah, sure.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, listeners, I don't think I've done this in years, but and this is a real test, right? Is anyone listening?
Yeah.
Great talking, Kathy. Why don't we go out, leave the music playing, and we'll just, our studio line here is 781-559-3300. That's 781-559-3300. Don't be shy. And if you have a question for our guest, Kathy Kottaridis, she's the Director of Historic Preservation for the City of Boston. And just about what we were saying about her work or about our Greek-American heritage.
Your own story?
Your own
Love to hear 'em.
story. Would love to hear them. So you can. The lines are open and my ears are open. So I'm going to turn up the ringer a little bit. Oh. No, that was me turning up the ringer. I got all excited for just a minute. Well, we'll give it a few more.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I don't think that everybody's got great stories. Everybody's got remembrances, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we're setting ourselves up as a community to put these somewhere where we can access them, and others can access them in the future. There are ethnic communities that have there are models that we can be talking about, and you and I have talked about this too. Communities that have worked with larger institutions, some of the old-time institutions, to collectively put our things as a distinct archive within their larger archives. So
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Right.
And then there's the one that I love to call out is the Yiddish Book Center out in Western Massachusetts,
Yes.
which came out of a young man who was was doing research on or in Yiddish, and began collecting Yiddish books and realized that they weren't being published anymore, and yet they were also being thrown out because most Jewish people didn't read or use Yiddish anymore, right?
Right. It was a nostalgic thing at that point.
And so he began collecting, and along the time that he's collecting,
Right.
he's also being given letters and photographs, the things that you're also discovering,
Yes,
right?
I'm getting all of these things. It's beautiful.
And he formed a whole nonprofit that led to a museum around this out on the campus of Hampshire College.
Right.
And I call that one out as another type of model where it's about collecting books, but it's also telling a story about the movement of language and changes in language in communities and ethnic groups over time too. And I think we have just as many similar stories to tell.
We do. We have a lot of those stories, and we have shared traditions. We have shared stories with other communities, and I think that's what we're talking about the Greek and Arabic section,
Yes.
because, geez,
Yep.
there were clubs where we were the music was blended, and still to this day, it's interesting that you can go into a place and hear a song and hear it sung in Greek and Armenian and maybe even Turkish in the same space, in the same song.
Yeah, yeah.
Music has no
Well,
boundaries.
and let's also point out that sometimes the look back on this period of time, the first generations of Greeks who came to the U.S. is seen as noble and wonderful, but we got beyond it. You know, we got beyond all of that tough poverty and all of the things that were really hard, and that what's better is where we progress to. And I just think that that's true. It is better that we got there, but it is important to remember, because we forget sometimes that it's that crucible of experience that defined who we became, right?
Yes,
and
right.
and many generations behind us from other ethnic groups are also experiencing this too. We have a story we have a model to give others, whether they're Greek or not.
we haven't finished writing our history.
No.
We've barely begun.
No, and don't write off that early stuff as being not important or not the glorious part of our story. It is. It has within it so many lessons for all of us. It teaches us things, so we have to preserve.
Here we go. We have our first caller.
Yay!
Yay! It's we want to turn it up. Good morning. You're on Grecian Echoes.
Good morning. I enjoyed listening to you and Kathy this morning. I have to say that Kathy's discussion, depiction of Maine and the Greeks in Maine is very, very different from what I've been told from people whose parents and grandparents grew up or first immigrated in Maine.
What did you? What
were
did
not
you?
well
Say more.
thought of, and it's amazing that a Greek was able to become a police officer.
Yeah.
From what I understand, they had to walk around in groups because the local Yankees would gang up on them. And
that's what I had
made
heard
it
too.
difficult for them to circulate in the towns and cities. And furthermore, there was a law that was, I don't think it was enacted, but it was proposed that Greeks should not be allowed to do lobster fishing because they were so successful that the locals were not doing as well.
Wow.
Oh boy, that's
Wow.
interesting.
That sounds, yes, it sounds really very possible. I don't want to suggest that my grandfather's story was,
Typical.
perfect or not typical. Here's the underlying, the family stories that come along with it. That my grandfather, in addition to being a cop, had a massive garden in which he generated produce for the family and all of that. But he also went around the whole neighborhood giving away potatoes and other produce to people in the community. And you can see there that he knew very well that he was building relationships and had to stay in good graces. And I don't think that. I think there are many. Pardon me?
He was a politician.
At the end of the day, if I read about my grandfather's history, I would say that he probably was unelected, but he was. I mean, he was figuring out that you have to, you attract, what is it, more bees with honey? So, and I'm not. By the way, I'm really underscoring that this was not an easy time. And racism, ethnic persecution was not unheard of. In fact, it was actually pretty common. And I think that knowing how to navigate that and watching and seeing how people responded, and this is to bring it back to this conversation about documents and family stories and written histories, is really important, because it gives people perspective on how how much either we've changed or how much, frankly, things sometimes stay the same.
I think also that in terms of remembrance, I think the best thing to do is to have a monument
Mm.
to, to honor those that
Yeah.
left the whole world and came into a society with everything was different. People were different, customs were different, society was different, the whole world was different.
Yep.
And that takes a lot of courage, a lot of courage.
And that's it. Thank you for saying that, because in the end, that is what we want to be able to talk about, is how hard that journey has been, both the social journey but the literal journey. And I think it's and there's lessons for all of us in that, on fortitude and and all of those things. So I want to know where you would put this monument, and if it's an actual
I would put
monument.
it near Faneuil Hall or near the Center.
Okay.
And I would put the monument there,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would sort of build around it or have references to it in terms of memorials.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a library, much like Steven Spielberg did for the Holocaust victims, where he had videos of people talking about their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that would be something I think quite interesting, where you could, well, have you been to the one near Faneuil Hall that is for the Holocaust victims?
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
very
Yeah.
well done.
And the
Very
Armenian.
well done.
And the
memorable,
Armenian
but
one on the green
something
one.
on those, something similar, not exactly the same, of course,
Yeah.
but something where people could walk in, push a button, listen to a story about one of the people that came in, as few as there are around,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe one of their descendants, about what it was like.
It's a great story. A monument like that could really unite the community around its history as well. So that would be a good project for us. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't get your name.
Sava.
Sava, okay. Well, thank you for
Thanks,
calling.
Sava. Great ideas.
It was really great ideas. We have another caller that I want to pick up on. She's been waiting on the second line. Thank you for calling.
Thanks.
Hello, you're on Grecian Echoes.
Καλημέρα, καλή εβδομάδα, Meleti and Kathy.
Hello.
Hello, Stella?
It's Stella Naharis.
Oh, Stella, hi. Do you know Stella? Oh, she's really great.
Meleti, thank you so much for having Kathy as your guest. It's my first time hearing you, Kathy,
Oh,
and it has been so enjoyable and informative. And congratulations on that rich background you have.
thank you.
And I just feel the two of you have made such a good connection for Greek cultural resources, I think.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, thank you.
And preservation of all that stuff you have, Meleti. So
Thank you.
I'm really encouraged and looking forward to having somewhere, perhaps one of those old revival buildings that we are protecting somewhere, have your artifacts in there. All that work you've been doing.
No.
That would be great.
There's a good idea, right? Repurpose a building for Greek cultural resources here in Boston that we can access. That would be wonderful. Stella, what a great idea.
Anyway, but mainly I wanted to say how enjoyable you are, Kath.
Thank you.
And-
Thank
and
that's
what
so-
you
thank
have-
you so much.
You're welcome, and what you have shared. And I wish both of you continued success, and I'm right there behind you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stella.
Thanks
Thank you
so
for
much.
calling. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. How nice that we had those wonderful suggestions,
Great to
Sava
have a vote
and
of
Stella.
confidence.
It is. They're votes of confidence. We got to keep going.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for coming in this morning. I hope
My
we can
pleasure.
do it again, and
Yeah.
that would be really great.
Yeah.
And
Maybe we talk about monuments. I
that's-
love that idea.
I love that idea.
Yeah. I mean, something that's not another depiction of Alexander the Great would be really great. I mean, he's great.
He's great,
But
but-
we've had, I think what we've discovered today is that there were many other greats who've come before us, and we really need to think about how we present that for the future, because we're not going to be here.
We
Right?
do. That's true. Ooh, wait a minute. We've got another call. Is this happening? Let's see. Well, maybe it's a marketing call. You never know. Hi, you're on the air on Grecian Echoes. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Hello. My name is Demetrius Vasquez. Just wanted to call in, and I'm Greek Spanish. I reactivated.
Really?
Awesome.
A few years ago, I reactivated an IHEPA chapter in Woburn, and we're doing a lot of great stuff. But I really enjoy listening to Grecian Echoes every morning. The Tipu Kepote,
Yes.
and we have our first annual fundraiser, actually a dance, this coming Saturday in Apokriatiko Gledi at Annunciation Woburn. And we've been doing a lot of great things since we reactivated the chapter to promote Hellenism. And for those who don't know, IHEPA was actually created to fight the Ku Klux Klan down south for Greek Americans. And so for me, it's close to my heart. I was born, raised in Athens, Greece. I came to the States when I was 18 for college. And unfortunately, I've had people that have made fun of both my ethnic Hispanic and Greek heritage, but
That's awful.
I'm proud of my Greek heritage, and for that reason, I reactivated the chapter in Woburn, and all the proceeds from our dance this Saturday are going to go to the local Greek school. We're going to sponsor a bus to take people to the Greek parade.
Bravo.
Also, homeless meal preparations, and we're going to even donate some money. IHEPA opened a national relief fund for the wildfires in Southern California, and some of the funds are going to go there. But I truly appreciate Grecian Echoes. Hold
on a second. What's your Spanish side?
My Spanish side, my father, I have a Mexican, but originally from northern Spain. I mean, I guess anyone with anyone with a Spanish last name has roots from Spain originally. But yes, I have, and I'm the only Greek Mexican in Woburn. So if you come to the Woburn Church and you forget my name, Dimitri Vasquez, just ask for the Greek Mexican there.
Dimitri, I lived and worked in Mexico for a year once upon a corporate career. Yeah. And when I come to Woburn now for your, is it this Saturday you said was your dance? Yes, I think
it's this Saturday. You could go to GreekBoston.com and you'll see the flyer. If you want to make reservations, my name and number is on the flyer. People could call me directly or just come up. Θα έχουμε δειλινά live Greek band, ζωντανή ελληνική μουσική, with Eliza Xenakis, young female singer. Θα έχουμε full buffet with chicken, beef skewers, and spanakopita, karidopita, and of course baklava, and then maybe brownies with ice cream sundae.
I'm getting hungry here. This is incredible. Dimitri, thank you very much for calling. We appreciate your calls. Very nice. Thank you.
Yes, bravo, sir. Keep doing what you're doing. I am a member of Grecian Echoes, by the way. Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, Kathy. By the way,
but let me just say that what Dimitri just told us is one of the best ways that we can preserve anything, which is to continue our cultural expressions.
Yes.
And so that to me is one of they call that intangible heritage.
Right.
It's not stuff that you can put in an archive, but it's things that we perpetuate by doing. So he's doing really important preservation by continuing on, as are you, these traditions.
I have to tell you something, a funny story. And there is a fellow who I'd known for years, many, many years, and we were actually sitting in Woburn at a dance at a table, side by side. And he said to me, I don't know how to say this, but I've got a lot of money. And I said, oh, well, that's good. You're still the same person I knew,
Right.
And he says, so I gave a lot of money here and I gave a lot of money there. I said, oh, well, that's nice. And he said, so if I give money to you, to your organization, what do I get back? And I thought, wow, is he investing, sees it as a
Uh-huh.
financial investment, but can't really see the cultural investment. That's the sell to people, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
it's what are we getting? Do we get a free CD? Do we get, an hour on Grecian Echoes?
Sure,
What,
sure. I mean, my guess, and every nonprofit I know comes up with a list of give backs, whether it's a tote bag or whether it's naming rights over a room or,
There we
a whole
go.
building.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the best thing we get is this incredible collection of stories and documents and things that we hand off to the future. And to me, that is so much more meaningful. If I'm giving money, to me, that's much more meaningful. That somebody is stewarding the past for the future.
Yes.
It's a different story if all you need for this time in your life while you're here and alive, that your name sits on a building. If that's the thing you want to send off into the future and you can afford it, yay. But
Right.
but I think that what we all want at the end of the day is to know that our lives mattered, and that not just our lives but those that we loved and who aren't with us anymore. I think that that's really important. I mean, that's the emotional underpinning, but the truth is, it's also information and material that will keep inspiring.
It will keep inspiring. We have and we always say, "May their memory be eternal."
Yes.
Let's really
do
live
it.
that, and not be throwing out their stuff on the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. And
It's-
look, what can we be? We've been talking mostly paper things today
Right.
when we're talking about archives, but I know that you're probably getting offers of embroideries and
Yes.
clothing
Oh,
and
yeah.
other things like that. Those objects have meaning to museums, and those also need to be thought about. I mean, you can't keep everything. I get it, but I think some of these things are so much exemplify generations before us, and what you offer now is a way of thinking about preserving and protecting them. And I think we all need to put our heads behind that. And our pocketbooks.
In our pocketbooks. Thank you. Right. It's bravo,
Yeah.
keep going
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing.
I'll be
but-
back for the telethon, Meleti.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you, Kathy. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Our guest this morning was Kathy Kottaridis, the Director of Historic Preservation for the City of Boston. What a great segment. And I have to thank our callers for calling in, all of those wonderful ideas. Do stay tuned. We've got a half hour left of Mondays with Meleti. And then coming up at the top of the hour, it's the Echoes of Kef time. Is it already? The Armenian program. How about that? Stay tuned.